Hi, I'm Beth.
And I'm Courtney.
Welcome to Dead Reckoning, the podcast where death isn't the end of the story.
And this time, we're talking about how the bones from the pit in Fort Mason ended up there, and how the bodies of the poor became the main specimens for medical experimentation. If you haven't listened to the last episode, you should go back and listen to that, because we're going to be building on what we covered there, where Beth talked about the pit of bones at Fort Mason in San Francisco. Spoiler alert, if you haven't already listened, it was from a Civil War era doctor who was dissecting the bodies of the poor to improve his surgical techniques, which were pretty good, as far as I understand. So to understand the history of how the bodies of poor people were used for anatomical dissection in the US, we have to go back and look at the UK, where this all started.
Of course.
All roads lead back to the empire, Beth. People have always been cutting up bodies to see what's inside. Okay, we have records of the Greeks doing this. Da Vinci famously is supposed to have looked at autopsy bodies to help him improve his sketches of human beings. But surgeons really got serious about this during the Renaissance era. Grave robbing to get corpses began as early as the 15th or 16th century.
Splendid.
It's nice, right? Dissecting the human body, even for the purpose of understanding how it works or medicine, was extremely unpopular. People did not like this. People in Europe, and the UK before the United States, they were Christian and they believed that they needed to be buried whole in order to be resurrected whole, right? There's this idea that kind of like what went into the ground is what was going to appear in heaven. So if your body's being taken apart, you could be missing some parts in the afterlife, right?
Were they aware that decomposition occurs?
They were, and I'm trying not to get off on a tangent, but this is why in crowded centuries in Europe, when they would bury the bones and then remove them to a charnel house after 10 years, they would try to keep all the bones together of the person. So, yeah. So because of this attitude towards the body, dissection started off as a punishment. There is a long history in the UK and Europe, I suppose, but especially the UK, of pulling apart bodies as punishments for crimes, right? We had gibbets. People's heads were put on pikes on London Bridge. Is that right, London Bridge? Or the gates or the tower, maybe?
What is a gibbet?
Okay, Beth, do you know what a gibbet is?
In theory, yes, but I don't think I could answer the question.
You don't want to answer it because it's gnarly. It's a fucking cage that they put at the edge of town that has your rotting corpse in it. Is designed to deter you from committing crimes, because the last person who came to town and committed a crime ended up executed and put in a cage to molder outside the town walls.
Were people put in them after execution or before? I'm just thinking about the movie Willow, where Mad Mardigan is put in a cage at the edge of town, but he's not dead.
After.
He's thankfully not.
I mean, as far as I know, after, but like, there could have been some like really gnarly judge back in the day who was like, fuck it, put him in there alive. I don't know. So dissection as a punishment is kind of an evolution, as part of the evolution of that. The Murder Act of 1752 legalized dissection of convicted murderers as part of their punishment. This was primarily used to punish murderers. And this is where the first bodies are given to surgeons or doctors or anatomists, depending on how you want to call them, to dissect and experiment on. To learn about medicine. Originally, they were convicted murderers.
Are we assuming then that there's no biological difference at all between convicted murderers and the rest of the population?
That is a philosophical and historical question that I'm not prepared to answer at this time. We'll get into skull measuring later. There's some of that in this episode. Even with the number of people that were hung in the UK at this time, which was probably quite a few, there were never enough bodies. There was never enough supply for anatomists, especially as interest in surgery began to increase. So now we're talking about like the late 18th century and into the 19th century.
Was this when the first medical colleges were starting to be established?
Yes, I think so. Yes. So what started to happen was, to fill the void, some enterprising entrepreneurs, aka thieves, started to steal bodies out of graveyards, dead bodies. I am going to try to refrain from the rest of this episode from calling these bodies fresh, because that's repulsive. It keeps coming to mind like fresh bodies. I'm going to try not to say that. I'm going to try to say newly dead, but I'm sorry in advance to everybody that hears the word fresh come out of my mouth in regards to human bodies in 18th century graveyards. So these people, these thieves, were called body snatchers. They were also called resurrectionists or resurrection men. They're sometimes called grave robbers, although grave robbing is technically something different.
Right, that's more like stealing the jewelry and whatever else.
Yeah, exactly. Usually, these guys worked in partners. There were partners that did it. The way they did it is pretty horrifying. I'm going to tell you, because this podcast is called Dead Reckoning. We're going to talk about how they did this. They would dig a hole. So, let's say the coffin is like 6 feet long, right? Buried in the ground. They would dig up the top part where the head would be. Okay, they would dig down to the coffin. One guy would jump in there, smash open the top of the coffin where the head is. Hold on, it gets worse. Put a rope around the neck of the dead body. And then he would scamper on up out of the hole, and the two of them would pull the corpse right up out of the hole. And then he would throw it in a sack, throw it over their shoulders, and run out of the graveyard. I think they would put the dirt back in. But they were trying to do this as quickly as possible. It was always happening at night, on dark nights, right? Because
it's no wonder they wanted a freshly dead body, because you don't want to think about what would happen if you tried to yank somebody's corpse out if they were not fresh.
I mean, I assume the head would just come off, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that happened also.
And then no value for that.
No value. $0, 0 pounds. They would sell these bodies then directly to surgeons or medical schools, and the price they got would vary based on what type of condition it was in, Beth, whether or not the head had come off or not. Sometimes they would pay more for, I'm sorry to tell you guys this, they would pay more for like children or pregnant women or something like that. Yeah, because those anatomists want to get in there and see what that's like, right?
Was this legal, or was the fact of grave?
This was not legal. This was highly illegal. All this stuff was done at night. These were definitely crimes committed by criminals. The public did not like this. This was bad shit. Nobody liked this. All segments of society were completely horrified by this, and all segments of society were at risk, at one way or another, of having their loved ones dug up and sold to early doctors, right?
Yeah, I was going to ask whether certain income classes were targeted more often or less often, and whether, I mean, would you steal the grave of some wealthy lord if you knew that their family might sue over it or something? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, just a good question. That's next in my outline, Beth. You're psychic. You just know that this is going to be a chance for me to scream about income inequality and how the poor always bear the brunt of these terrible policies.
Of course.
Actually, everyone found ways to keep the body snatchers away from their loved ones. There was like kind of different methods depending on how much money you had. Rich people would build mausoleums. So like giant, concrete vaults above ground that were locked and like durable. They couldn't be broken into. They would use nested caskets, like multiple caskets, and they would use caskets of like a very durable material like iron, or like really thick wood to make it harder to break into them.
Yeah, that
They
makes
had
sense.
mort safes, which are something you'll see in Edinburgh. We'll talk about Edinburgh later, which were like cages that would go over the grave to keep people from breaking in. They had these things called patent coffins, which were iron coffins with these like big heavy screws in them that were impossible to undo once they were in. I actually saw one of these at St. Bridget's, Beth, in London. They have one on display in the crypt. So like,
I don't remember if I saw that when I was there, but I probably did.
There were ways to make the coffins impenetrable, the graves impenetrable. They would hire guards, to stand watch. These bodies are only good for a certain amount of time, right?
Right.
Once they begin to decay too much, they don't want to buy them. They're not as useful. So really, we're talking about guarding the bodies for like a week or 10 days or something.
Yeah.
For poor people, there were also options. A lot of times they would organize. So they would get their community to take turns standing watch over the grave for the first week or so.
I kind of love that, actually.
It's like mutual aid for...
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And they had these things called dead houses, also in Edinburgh, where it's basically like a locked outdoor facility that's locked up tight, maybe guarded, where the bodies would go in for a week or so until they were decayed enough to then put into the ground. And that was like kind of a community option. Everyone could use that. Sometimes they would try to pay to have bodies buried extra deep so that it was too hard for the body snatchers to get down there.
Yeah.
Those were the ways that like all segments of society, hold on, let me rephrase that. Most segments of society were able to avail themselves of to prevent body snatching. But that did not stop all the resurrection men, because there were some other options for them, which were the really, really poor, destitute people who didn't have someone to watch over their graves for them. A lot of times public burials, like municipal burials, especially around this time, were pit burials, which means people were not buried in coffins. They were kind of like a trench would be dug and many bodies would be put in there. If they had coffins, they were very flimsy. They were sometimes buried in these overcrowded churchyards where it was kind of easy to get at the bodies. And that's really what ended up happening, right? As people got better at avoiding body snatchers, they just went further down the social and economic ladder to source material for the doctors. That sounds terrible. Source material for the doctors. I'm like looking at Carolyn. Could you imagine if this was an episode of Sorceress? Okay, so several thousand bodies per year were stolen. That's kind of a lot, right?
Yeah.
And I think this is really just talking about like London and Edinburgh, right? The cities in the UK and Scotland, or England and Scotland, I should say. The public did not like this. Again, people were pissed and they would riot over this. Edinburgh, we're going to talk about them next, but that was kind of the area where the most advanced anatomy studies were going on. So there was a lot of anatomical studies and dissection in medical schools in Edinburgh. And one of them was burned to the ground after a massive public riot. An anatomy school, they burned it to the ground because they found shallowly buried body parts in the yard of the medical school.
That sounds really familiar.
Doesn't it? This is where you guys have to go if you haven't already listened to the episode about Fort Mason. This is the same kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the doctors and the surgeons, they knew it was gross. Okay. First of all, these were surgeons and doctors were upper class people, right? The people who were studying anatomy, like without getting into the whole fucking history of barber surgeons and all that, you guys can read that on your own. People who were studying anatomy and going to these medical schools were upper middle class and wealthy people, right? They did not want to be seen dealing with common thieves, body snatchers, trading in body parts for cash. They didn't, that was, they knew it was offensive.
Also illegal.
And illegal. I think they cared more about the offense, to be totally honest with you, Beth. They were constantly trying to find ways to hide their connection to this body snatching trade, even though everyone knew about it, and to try to get the bodies from somewhere else. So, like, one of the things they tried to do, they tried to get hospitals to give them their bodies.
Right.
But hospitals at this time, people were already terrified of hospitals. The public was terrified of hospitals because hospitals were super fucking dangerous back in the day, right? In the early 1800s. This is before germ theory. They don't know how diseases are spread. But people know that the likelihood, if they go into a hospital, they're more likely to die in there of an infectious disease than get cured. So people were, you had to be really bad to go to a hospital, right?
Yeah.
And so they were like, no, the hospital people were like, absolutely not. They're already afraid to come here, right? If we sell their bodies to you, they're going to be even less likely to come in and get treatment. So the doctors were the doctors were doing shady shit too, right? Now, we've got criminal convicted murderers who are hung, executed, I assume hung. Their bodies are used for dissection. Then we have bodies stolen out of cemeteries. The next phase in the evolution of this is called burking. Beth, do you know what burking is?
I don't.
Do you know who Burke and Hare are?
Are those the two? I want to say body snatchers, but there was a film about them.
They're not body snatchers so much as like living body snatchers, because what they did was murder people and then sell their bodies to the doctors. So this is Edinburgh, okay?
So side note here though, I just Googled burking because I was looking at it in your outline, and the first one is a Merriam-Webster definition, and then the second link is Burger King.
What?
No.
Like it thought you were typing in Burger King? I thought you were going to tell me it was a sex thing. I was like, oh God, what is it now? What is Burking now?
Just Burger King.
Yeah, but associating Burger King with men who are murdering and selling bodies, not good.
Yeah, they might want to check their SEO. So Burke and Hare, two fucking criminals, living and operating in Edinburgh in 1828. They are running an inn, or like a guest house or something, right? Lodging house, that's what it was called. And they murdered an old sick woman. And the reason they murdered her is I think it's not important, but I think they killed her because they didn't want her spreading disease around their lodging house or something. They killed her for a stupid reason. I mean, don't kill anyone, that's wrong. But like initially they killed her for a reason other than to sell her body. And then they were trying to get rid of the body after they killed her. And they're like, well, maybe we could sell it. And so they did. And they made a lot of money. They sold it to this surgeon named Robert Knox, this prominent surgeon in Edinburgh. And when they saw how easy it was and how few questions he asked, they were like, fuck it. And they went on and they murdered, I think, 16 people total.
Wow.
To sell their bodies to Robert Knox specifically before they got caught.
How much money were they making per corpse here?
You know, it's something like the equivalent of like a year's worth of labor or something.
Wow.
It's like a crazy, a huge amount of money for these people who were running a shady lodging house, right?
Right, but
and
making it well worth their risk.
Yes, exactly. Worth the worth the risk. I mean, even the body snatchers that were operating out of graveyards, it was kind of the same thing, right? You could either go work in a mill and, or you could take the risk and commit crimes. And, to them, it's like maybe a victimless crime. They weren't actually killing people. They were just stealing bodies.
Right.
Burke and Hare, this is a different kind of conspiracy, right? They're actually murdering people and selling their fresh bodies to Robert Knox.
I haven't watched it, but there is I think I mentioned a movie from 2010, just called Burke and Hare, and it co-stars Andy Serkis, who played Gollum in the Lord of the Rings movies and many other things. But
I didn't know that guy played other things.
Yeah, he was in like Planet of the Apes too.
Oh shit. Okay. I'll have to watch that. I mean, I confess to having known about this long before I did the research for this episode. Burke and Hare is like kind of a famous story in goth circles. I don't know what am I going to say. Somebody has a perfume called Burke and Hare. Which I don't know about that.
Oh no,
it's too much, you guys.
So is Burking then murdering somebody and then selling their corpse?
Yes, it is. That's exactly what it is. And people, I'm getting ahead of myself, but this started happening in London too. And so what we're going to get to is this is kind of like the final straw that tips Parliament into acting. So Burke was hung. Hare testified against him and then disappeared, like left for the continent or something, changed his name, got the fuck out of Edinburgh.
Please tell me that Burke's body was sold to a surgeon.
Girl, even better. Even better. He was executed and his body was publicly dissected.
Wow.
So they not only did they had a public dissection, and then his skeleton was preserved to be used in anatomy training. And his parts were sold off, like parts of him as trinkets. Somebody bound a book out of his skin.
Wow.
Which you can see at this museum. It's probably in Scotland. So they stripped him clean, right? Knox, surprisingly, no punishment, right? This is the surgeon. This is the upper class guy who was buying all these bodies. Here in the U.S., that's a criminal conspiracy, and he would also be hung and his skeleton put on display for anatomy purposes. But there was no charges against him. He was not held accountable. So the public rioted again. There's a lot of riots in this episode. And they built an effigy of Knox, the doctor, paraded him through town, dissected the effigy, and lit it on fire. So in case anyone was confused about how the people of Edinburgh felt about Robert Knox, this is it, right? So, okay. So the next phase, convicted murderers dissected, stolen bodies dissected, murder victims dissected. This brings us to the Anatomy Act in the UK. Okay, there are some people who say that Burke and Hare are the real authors of the Anatomy Act because the public was so sick of this shit. They were demanding that something be done about it. And so British politicians and surgeons got together and proposed that the shortage in bodies be covered by poor people who died in workhouses. They drafted a bill called the Anatomy Act. They drafted it in 1829. This was right after Burke and Hare. And it did not pass until 1832. It had to go through multiple revisions to get passed. The bill was very unpopular. There were also riots about this bill.
Yeah.
The way they revised it to pass it was to make the language as vague as possible. In the end, it simply said that workhouse guardians would become the executors for the unclaimed dead there.
Oh, God.
This is duplicitous, right? They are hiding the true rule here, because they knew that there was no time or effort being made to locate family and friends of people who died poor in the workhouse.
And that is something that has not changed since
has
then,
not changed,
frankly.
Right? Yeah. And then there definitely wasn't going to be a search for people from the workhouse with the anatomist banging down the door for corpses, right? I mean, these workhouse guardians were then making money on this.
Yeah.
I guess I should detour a little bit. Maybe you guys don't know what a workhouse is. Workhouse. Yeah. Do you know what a workhouse is, Beth?
I mean, it's really it's if you're living in poverty, and especially if you've gone into debt, you have to go to one of these places and do some sort of hard labor on behalf of the municipality. And unfortunately, they were often places where people were worked to death.
Yes, exactly.
And whole families would be sent to these places.
Yeah, they were like prisons. Basically, they're in around this time. It's actually 1834, but this is kind of like cooking up around the time of the Anatomy Act. I think these things are related. There's this another act called the New Poor Laws that came out. And this basically said, it basically codified the idea that poverty is a moral failure, right?
Yeah.
Poor people need to be punished. They need to be disciplined. They need to be treated like criminals in order to encourage them to work, right? As we all know, that's how that works, right? People love to be poor, and they'll just sit around and be poor. I'm not going to start screaming about this until the end of the episode, so
we can scream together.
I have some feelings, but we'll get to it. The New Poor Laws made workhouses the only way to get relief from poverty. So you couldn't go pick up bread. You couldn't get, cash aid. You couldn't get free hospital care. You couldn't get any of that. If you needed help, you had to go to a workhouse. And a workhouse was like a prison. They locked you in. They separated families. So if your whole family went to a workhouse, the women would be sent to one workhouse, the men to another, and the children to another.
Right.
They took all your clothing. They made you wear this nasty, old sack or something that, got recycled from inmate to inmate. And they made you do hard labor and intentionally tedious labor. So like there was this thing called oakum picking, I think that's what it's called, where they're made to pull apart ship ropes that are covered in tar in order to recycle the fibers or something. It's made to be intentionally hard and pointless so that you wouldn't want to go into the workhouse, right? They would feed you some kind of gruel 3 times a day. These places were full of disease. People were worked to death. They died of malnutrition, all kinds of places, right? So I guess if you want to talk about a corpse factory, the workhouse is probably a good place because it was a really unhealthy and hard place to live. And of course, the idea in Parliament was, these bills being passed by rich people and lords and all that, was that the poor needed to use their bodies to pay back the aid and the help that the state had given them over the years. Right?
Well, and this, in some respects, was very similar to the rationale behind enslavement in the Americas. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe it. We'll get to that later too. This is like I feel like as I get better as a podcaster, I'll stop saying we'll get to it because okay, I think people get the idea, right? So the United States, we're coming across the pond to the land of the free, the home of the brave, unless you're poor. The American colonies and later the states basically borrowed from the British model. We had a similar evolution of things, of laws and ways that people were acquiring bodies. It was kind of similar to what happened in the UK. The first anatomy program here was at Penn in 1745. Penn has its own problems now. Currently, they have like a whole division full of skulls that they've stolen from various graveyards across the world to conduct scientific racism on it. The Stanley Morton skull collection. We'll drop the link in the notes. Don't worry, guys. It's probably going to be a future episode. Here I go again. Okay. Corpses were scarce in the United States as they were in the UK. Most states also had laws allowing for the dissection of murderers as part of their sentence. So similar to the UK, convicted murderers into the lab. In the US, they also expanded it to other crimes because we love like the carceral state here in the US. That's our own special invention.
Yeah.
They expanded to other crimes like robbery, arson, theft, and dueling. Dueling was a huge problem here in the US. The authorities hated it. They did not want people dueling. And so these laws, they were expanding these laws to cover things like dueling and theft and arson were actually meant to deter the crimes, not so much to bring more bodies in, right?
So wait, but let's say you're in a duel. You lose the duel, presumably you die. Are you the one that then gets sold to the surgeon, or do they convict?
Both of you, I bet. Yeah.
Oh my God.
I mean, I don't know. That's a good question because I don't know if they prosecuted people for dueling. I'm not actually sure about that. You would think, but
if it's against the law.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's true. And we do like to put people in prison here. So then again, the people who were dueling, it's like, who was it? Alexander Hamilton, or was he the one?
Right. I mean, maybe the duels that we know about are the ones that are among,
Aaron
Burr?
The
duels.
Aaron Burr, sir.
There's probably plenty of duels that weren't among famous people that we don't know about, but who knows? Yeah.
That's the one I was thinking of.
Terry Broderick.
Yeah. The Terry Broderick duel, which was held in San Mateo County because it was illegal in San Francisco, right? So they really were trying to discourage this. Okay, so as demand for corpses goes up, right? We don't have enough criminals. Body snatching starts to happen here in the US. It was illegal, just like it was in the UK. And just like in the UK, this meant that marginalized populations, poor people, and here in the US, especially Black people, were more likely to have their bodies snatched.
Right.
The cemeteries were vulnerable, but also people in the South who owned slaves sold the bodies of enslaved people who had died to anatomists.
Oh my God.
It's an especially harrowing part of the culture down there, right?
Yeah.
During slavery. Like it's especially, it's just, when you think about even in death, the body of an enslaved person was still a commodity, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so much non-consensual medical research took place among African American.
Yeah,
Black
Marion
people.
Sims, right? The father of, is that what his name was? Marion Sims, the father of gynecology.
Yes.
Experimenting on Black women without their consent.
Well, and the Tuskegee experiments and the Henrietta Lacks cell lines, all of it.
That's another episode. Nat Turner, who led a failed insurrection in the South, his body was dissected and his skeleton was used for anatomy.
Oh, no.
He also, like Burke, I mean, Nat Turner was not a criminal. He was a hero. He was led a revolution. But like Burke, he was dissected. His skeleton was preserved, and parts of his body were cut off and used for souvenirs and trinkets.
Oh, God.
In a way, it's like the anger towards Burke for what was happening with body snatching, and, the public kind of took their anger out. In the South at this time, a slave revolt, the amount of anger and hatred and the desire to punish and deter other people from rising up kind of shows up in this in this treatment. This is, of course, leading to the era of scientific racism and phrenology, which is skull measuring, which is what's happening at Penn. And it led to we get into a pretty gnarly body trade in the skeletons and skulls of indigenous people and Black people in the United States. So back to body snatching. There were riots about body snatching in the U.S. too. People did not like this. In 1788, there was a riot called the Doctors' Riot in New York City. So this is pretty early, 1788, right? Columbia College had the city's medical school, which at that time was near several African-American burial grounds. I think these were freed people in New York who were being buried in their own cemeteries. The students at Columbia started ramping up their body snatching in order to do dissections. And of course, they were going to the African-American burial grounds nearby. And they got caught. One student got caught with a woman's arm, and a huge riot broke out. 2,000 people took to the streets. The doctors had to run and hide. The governor sent the militia in to break it up, and 6 people died. Oh. So it was a big deal. I actually
never sent in the militia.
There comes the colonial militia. Ben Franklin, you guys might know about this too. Ben Franklin kind of has a reputation of being a part of a resurrection ring. When he was living in London, he had I don't know if it's like a neighbor in his building was a doctor or a surgeon, and he was holding anatomical dissections in his basement.
Wow.
And Ben Franklin attended.
Of course he did.
Of course he did.
He's a curious man.
In between the hookers and what else was he up to? Recent excavations is what revealed this, right? They went in to probably pour a new foundation or something in the basement, and they found this. And it's just like Fort Mason. They found 1,200 human bones, different sized bones, that showed evidence of dissection in the basement. And historians think he was sourcing the bodies from a gallows at the end of the street.
Wow.
So, yeah. So, like the UK, the people in the US were pissed, right? They didn't want body snatching. They didn't have enough criminals. They had enough, but you know what I mean. So they started passing anatomy acts at the height of the grave robbing in the 19th century. These happened later in the United States. UK is 1830s. The US is more like 1860s. Mm-hmm. I think we were a little bit behind. Most states had anatomy acts after the Civil War. Here in the United States, the bodies were most likely sourced from almshouses, prisons, and orphanages. So by 1913, the statistic is that most of the bodies used for anatomical dissection were from almshouses. Mm-hmm. Beth, you probably know a lot about almshouses, right?
There were a couple of almshouses in San Francisco that I have not actually studied, but the city and county hospital, which we talked about in the previous episode, was a regular source of bodies for medical dissection, mm-hmm. not just to this one doctor we talked about, but one of the things that I wrote about in my cemetery book is this place that was out sort of along the beach in Potrero Hill, where these body parts were stuck in the mud.
What?
And it looked as though somebody was working on them at the city and county hospital and then throwing the parts into this creek that then washed down into the bay.
Girl, they threw everything into that creek.
Yeah.
They threw cattle parts in that creek. They threw their garbage. That's Islias Creek, right?
It isn't. I can't remember which creek it was, but
okay, well, they threw shit into all the creeks. Creeks were like the natural garbage dumping ground for San Francisco.
Yeah. But so, yeah, the poor people who were dying in the public hospital, nobody would come to claim them, and then they became subject to medical research.
Mm-hmm.
It's a story as old as time.
Yeah, I mean, our here in California, well, we'll get to California in a minute, but we passed our Anatomy Act in 1864, which is probably right around when Dr. Bentley was doing his research, or maybe he was a little later.
Yeah.
But around the time of the Civil War.
Yeah, because he was able to get them legally from people who died in poverty.
Yeah, I mean, and we also, the language they used in the Anatomy Act was unclaimed, which is the kind of the same turn of phrase they used in the UK to obscure what was really happening. It's a little more forthright in the California law. I'll read that in a second. But the idea is that somehow people will assume that poor people who died in a hospital or an almshouse, that they had no one cared about them, and no one cared. But these places were not doing a lot of work to find the people who cared, right?
Yep.
Especially when they had, they're turning people through these facilities, and they also have a way to dispose of them, right? Who knows if they were selling them? Like, they're not necessarily people with no friends and no family.
Right.
They're just poor.
Yeah.
There is this quote that there's a section in the book that we talked about in your episode, Beth, on the archaeological work that was done at Fort Mason, where they talked about the Anatomy Act in California, excuse me, and in the United States. And they have these quotes from people who are running almshouses at the time, guardians of almshouses, like directors of almshouses. And there's a quote from one who was a board of directors running an almshouse in Philadelphia. And they say, we have to use these unclaimed dead. Otherwise, the bodies of normal people who have people to mourn them will be stolen and used.
Oh, right? My God.
Talk about fucking circular thinking, but also, like, they don't see these people as human, right? Like, these are poor people. We don't want middle-class people to be disturbed in their graves, God forbid.
Yeah.
So we have to hand these bodies of poor people over to the surgeons, so that the rest of us are not affected by this very unpopular practice.
Right.
So California, we're a little later, right? Because we're on the West Coast. We don't have any medical schools in 1788. So our Anatomy Act is passed in 1864, and it allowed the coroner to release remains for the purpose of dissection. It allowed the coroner to surrender the bodies of those persons required to be buried at public expense. The anatomists were required to use the bodies for science, and they were also required to give them a proper burial when they were done, and they were supposed to pay for that at their own expense.
How many of them do you think actually went through with that last part?
Oh, I was going to say 0, but then I remembered that when we were talking, you said there were some people buried at City Cemetery in the indigent burial ground. So,
and there are researchers who may know who the doctors were that were involved with those burials, but I don't know who they were. So, yeah.
So we could retroactively give them their snaps for following the law. Just kidding. No flowers for you.
Meeting the very lowest bar here.
The very lowest bar. And I know I feel like I'm going to like show up at my doctor and she's going to be like, oh, you want penicillin? We had to use bodies to learn about that. So you're not. What are you talking about? You didn't like the use of the bodies on the poor. this was important work and we did have to do it. I don't think it had to be done this way. I think there were other ways to do this. And I could spend another hour talking about those other ways, but I'm already at 46 minutes and I got some shit to get through here. So that's what happened in California. It was also, the penal code also allowed prisoners and people executed for crimes to be put out for dissection in California. So I think that probably didn't change for a long time. Eventually here in the United States, we get to a point where we are gifting our bodies, donating our bodies to science, right?
There's this sort of in between, and maybe you're going to talk about it, where people who are in poverty can agree before their death to sell their body, and that money, they get the money ahead of time to help pay for whatever ultimate funeral expenses.
That's cool. I didn't know about that.
It is and it isn't, because it sort of preys on people who don't have any other means of paying for their own burials to sell their bodies in exchange for those expenses.
Yeah, and we do, unfortunately, that does go on now too. Mm-hmm. It's not, so in 1968, the United States, they issued the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act, which all the states adopt, which basically allows you to donate your body to science and sets up a bunch of parameters and regulations around it. That is it's pretty handled pretty well. I don't know if you've ever read Mary Roach's book Stiff, but she spends a lot of time in the dissection rooms and talks to the doctors. And nowadays, it's a respectful process. You can donate your body to science. They'll cremate you in the end. There is another situation, though, which is the trade in human tissues and body parts, which is not as well regulated because, dead bodies they're kind of like quasi property in the United States. They're in a sort of a gray area under the law. And there is a trade in tissues. We were talking about the jar of eyeballs last time, but it could be, these are things that are not being donated. These are not donor tissues, right? There are strict rules about donating organs and tissues. This is something different. This is still being used for medical research, and there's probably a lot of legitimate uses for parts when someone's dead, but it's very poorly regulated, and it's often aimed at poor people. So if you can't afford a cremation or a burial, there are funeral homes that will refer you to body brokers, essentially, who will cut you up and sell you for parts, right? That's, Beth, what am I going to say now? That's an issue for another episode. But that is happening.
Well, I'm just thinking about that amazing bodies exhibit that has toured around the world, and the revelations that the people whose bodies are in those exhibits did not consent to be included and displayed in that way.
No, they think they were prisoners.
Yeah.
I've heard they come from China, and I don't know. I don't know if that's a rumor fueled by racism. Could be, right? But also, the People's Republic of China is not the most respectful fucking government in the world either, right? So, would I put it past them? No, not at all.
Yeah.
So I saw that exhibit in Vegas, and it really disturbed me.
Yeah, I saw it in Atlanta.
It upset me in a way that, I'm on a podcast called Dead Reckoning. I read a 600-page book called, Dissecting the Destitute, or I'll put it in the notes, you guys. But I'm not squeamish, but that exhibit really upset me, and maybe that's why, or there was just something very upsetting about it. We're finally at the part where it's time to yell about our government.
Yeah.
I want to say that I first learned about this. I read an article in the Order of the Good Death about an excavation of an archaeological site in London. It was a graveyard that was attached to a workhouse, a former workhouse.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the first time that I found out where they were getting that they were using the bodies of the poor from the workhouse to do dissections. And I remember reading it and being like, of course they are, right? I was reading it at the time that I was writing about Dickens. Okay. Stay with me, you guys. Charles Dickens, famous British author, his parents were in debtor's prison. Mm-hmm. And he was sent to an orphanage, just like a workhouse, or maybe he was sent to a juvenile workhouse. I don't know. He worked in a boot blacking factory and lived in an orphanage until he was a teenager. So his books are all about how the system grinds poor people down and doesn't give them a chance. And, that's his whole oeuvre, right? There's a line I was writing about Dickens, Christmas Carol, which I was writing about the ghosts in the Christmas Carol. And I was, reading Christmas Carol and watching the movie adaptations and everything. And there's this line Ebenezer Scrooge says when this guy comes to his door looking for charity donations on Christmas. And he says, "Are there no workhouses? Are there no orphanages?" Like, I don't have to give money for poor people. Send them to the fucking workhouse. Put them in an orphanage. It's not my problem, right?
Is that in the Muppet Christmas Carol version?
Yeah, we all know what happens to Ebenezer Scrooge. So if you don't want to be visited by 3 fucking ghosts because you're a cheap bastard who doesn't care about your fellow humans, don't vote for Republicans. Okay. The root of all of this, the root of all of this is the criminalization of poverty, right? Mm-hmm. It starts with we're going to dissect murderers because they're criminals and they deserve it. And it evolves into we're going to dissect poor people because they're criminals and they deserve it, right?
Yeah.
They have not given enough to society, so we're going to take it out in their flesh. In the U.S., cemeteries were often built, you probably know this, Beth, I don't have to tell you, built next to hospitals and workhouses and asylums. Partly to put the dead from there in, but also these are probably in places no one wants to be, right? Like they put the cemeteries in areas where no one wants to go. No one wants to go to these fucking workhouses or hospitals even. And a lot of times they used inmate labor to dig graves for people who were going into those cemeteries.
Oh my God.
So this is a continuum of you can see the evolution to how we use them to dig the graves. Now we're going to use their bodies to learn about science.
I remember in writing about the Marine Hospital in the Presidio, this was a place where sailors who came to San Francisco and who were very ill would either recover or not. And there was a burial ground behind it. And again, the graves, I think, were usually dug by their less ill friends in the hospital. And they made it out to sound like, oh, these people are so loyal to each other. They're digging each other's graves. But I do wonder if there was an element of sort of forced into it.
I think you have to. I mean, look at Hart Island, New York, right? That's people from Rikers were digging those graves, right?
Right. Well, and that's a place where, you were talking about burying in trenches earlier. That's what they do there.
And, Hart Island was originally a potter's field, like a municipal burying ground, but they also buried people who had AIDS out there because they thought they would contaminate the cemeteries. And there was all this stigma.
And it became a COVID burial ground too.
Yes, it did. Let's see. So I have another quote here from the Gems of Humanity that were running the Philadelphia Almshouse that sort of sums all this up. Paupers are of no use to society while living. There is no wrong done in making them useful while dead. These are the people who are running the institutions that are supposed to be helping people who are in poverty. in America, in the almshouses, there were sick people. There were people with mental illness. There was just like run-of-the-mill homeless people, poor people. The people who were in charge of helping them the attitude was that they almost were like animals, right?
Right.
And that they needed to pay their way in death by sacrificing their bodies to science.
Yeah, capitalism. They grind your body to death while it's alive, and then they find a use for it afterwards.
100%. I said I was going to talk about Bentham. There were two guys, Malthus. I think it's Thomas Malthus. Have you ever heard the term Malthusian?
Mm-hmm.
Do I listen to too much fucking NPR? This is like, I always didn't know what that word meant. I don't know what I thought that was. But Malthus, fuck him, he's terrible. If I said his name wrong, good. His ideas, him and Bentham, who Bentham donated his body to science, Jeremy Bentham. Did you know that? His fucking corpse is still on display somewhere in the UK. It's mummified now. I have a mug with his head on it. I tried to find it for this episode to show you guys, but I don't know where it is. Malthus, his attitude was that if you help poor people, you're just going to create more poor people. Like if you feed them, then they're going to have children. And then those children will be poor. And so you needed to it's like pure eugenics, right? I mean, this is like, I guess, what the 1800s in the UK was all about, right?
Well, and we're still doing all of this today by like cutting off food stamps and taking away people's assets if they want any public assistance.
You brought me to my main screaming point, which is that we just fucking cut Job Corps.
Yeah.
WIC is formula for fucking babies. What are we doing? Food stamps for children. All of it is based on these old ideas. This is like, I have this written that these laws now, this big, beautiful bill or whatever the fuck he's calling it. I don't know when this episode is going to air. So maybe the US would have been nuked out of existence by the time September comes around. And you guys are like,
or at least that bill will be in the ground.
Yeah. These laws now are the bastard stepchildren of Malthus and Bentham and the new poor laws of 1832. They required people to surrender themselves to prison in order to eat and to surrender their bodies and their souls to their thinking, to the bone saws, to pay for their gruel or whatever they were getting to eat, right? Like, hey, Courtney here. This is not the best description of Malthus, but since this isn't a fucking economics podcast, I am going to put a comment in the show notes that has more information about Malthus and the Malthusian trap, and you guys can read to your heart's content. I guess what I want to wrap on is that this is why we're talking about this in 2025, you guys. Yeah. Not just because it's gruesome and delightful to some of us, but because this shit is the same shit, different day.
Yep.
The same ideas, the same toxic ideas that we inherited from the UK are still, I mean, they still have these problems in the UK too, not to let them off the hook. But we're still dealing with it today. And I don't think, this is maybe a dramatic example, but I think that's why we need to learn about this stuff. Maybe that's why you wrote a whole book about cemeteries, Beth.
Yeah. And I think, a moment of silence for all these people who, through no decision of their own, helped develop the medicine that saves so many lives today. I always find that dichotomy really frustrating because, the surgeons, the doctors eventually develop techniques that save so many lives, but at such exploitation at the root of it. Like, it makes me feel complicit, and I didn't make any of those decisions, but it's just really upsetting.
Yeah, I mean, we're all grateful for medical advances, right? Like, it's good, but it could, we should know where it comes from, I guess, is my whole point, right?
Yeah.
We should know about it.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. This is really fascinating and very infuriating.
That's going to be mine. My episodes are going to be about 65% something gross, and then 35% screaming about politics.
Good job on math there.
Wouldn't have it any other way.
Did you see the little wheels turning in my the little tiny
like,
hamster wheel trying to rub two fucking brain cells together to come up with that math?
Yeah, that's exactly.
Just for you guys.
5 + 5 is 10, is it? Dead Reckoning, the podcast where death isn't the end of the story. Hosted by Courtney Minnick and Beth Weingartner, produced by Carolyn Kissick and Here Lies a Story, with art design by Dante Silliman. Our music is Act Calm by OTE. Please rate, review, and subscribe to Dead Reckoning on your favorite podcast platform, or email us at show@deadreckoningpodcast.com. You can follow Courtney at Here Lies a Story on Instagram and at Courtney Minnick on Blue Sky, and see more of her work at herelisastory.com. You can follow Beth at Beth Weingartner on Instagram, Blue Sky, and Mastodon, and see more of her work at bethweingartner.com.